a starving maid in a torn uniform cowering before the most feared man in Seoul. Passers-by laughed as she dug through the wet trash. Her landlord stood nearby, whispering that she was finally where she belonged, among the refuse. She heard every giggle. She felt every raindrop. She remembered every face that had turned away. Lee Kong-jun had built his empire on fear and silence. From the back alleys of Busan to the penthouses of Gangnam, the Dragon of Seoul controlled everything: construction, shipping, and the shadows in between. For 15 years, he was the predator that no one could touch. But 3 weeks ago, the dragon had bled. Ambushed by a rival faction known as the Viper, Kong-jun had been left to die in a service corridor. He needed a ghost to save him. He found one in a maid named Mira Patel. The service hallway of the Grand Seoul Hotel was supposed to be empty. It was 2 a.m., and the only sound should have been the hum of the vending machines. But tonight, the air smelled like lemons and copper. Mira knew that smell. It was the smell of blood. She stopped her heavy laundry cart. A trail of red drops led away from the elevators and into the shadows near the linen closet. Mira gripped the handle of her cart. She wanted to run. She should have run. But her feet moved forward on their own. A man lay slumped against the wall. He wore a suit that cost more than she made in 5 years, but now it was ruined. His shirt was soaked in red. He breathed in short, ragged gasps. When Mira stepped closer, his eyes snapped open. They were dark, dangerous, and full of pain. He tried to lift his hand, and Mira saw the glint of a gun, but he was too weak. His hand dropped back to the floor. "Help," he whispered. It wasn't a demand. It was a surprise, as if he never expected to ask for it. Heavy footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall. Voices shouted in Korean, angry and fast. "Check the exits." He couldn't have gone far. The man's eyes widened. He knew he was dead. He looked at Mira, and for a second, the scary monster mask slipped. He was just a terrified man who didn't want to die alone in a hallway. Mira didn't think. She acted. "Get in," she whispered, pointing to her large canvas laundry cart. The man looked at the pile of dirty towels and sheets. He looked at the gun in his hand, then at the approaching shadows. He didn't argue. With a groan of pain, he dragged himself up and tumbled into the cart. Mira immediately threw a heavy pile of used tablecloths over him. She arranged the dirty linens to hide the shape of his body. "Don't breathe," she hissed. She began to push. The cart was heavy before, but now it felt like pushing a boulder. The wheels squeaked loudly on the linoleum floor. Squeak, squeak, squeak. 2 men in black suits turned the corner. They stopped when they saw her. One of them had a scar across his nose and held a silenced pistol by his leg. "You," the scarred man barked. Mira stopped. She hunched her shoulders, making herself look smaller. She stared at the floor. "Housekeeping," she said, her voice shaking just enough to sound like a scared maid, which wasn't hard because she was terrified. "Did you see a man run past here?" the killer asked. He stepped closer. He looked at the cart. Mira shook her head rapidly. "No, sir. Just laundry. Very heavy tonight. Big party upstairs." The man stared at her for a long second. He looked at the cart, then back at her face. He didn't see a hero. He didn't see a threat. He just saw a tired woman in a uniform. To him, she was part of the furniture. "Go," he sneered, waving her away. "Get out of here." Mira nodded and pushed. She didn't look back. She walked past them, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pushed the cart all the way to the loading dock where the delivery trucks waited in the rain. Once they were safe in the cold night air, she pulled back the sheets. "Sir." The cart was empty. Mira blinked. She looked around the wet pavement. He was gone. He had vanished into the rain as silently as a ghost. She looked back into the cart. Resting on top of a dirty white towel was a silk handkerchief. It was stained with blood, and in the corner, embroidered in gold thread, was a small dragon. He hadn't said thank you, but he had left a promise. 3 weeks later, the rain was still falling. It felt like the sky hadn't stopped crying since that night at the hotel. Mira walked up the broken concrete steps to her basement apartment, her legs heavy. The envelope in her pocket was empty. The hotel had fired her the morning after the shooting. "Security risk," the manager had said, not looking her in the eye. They didn't care that she had worked there for 2 years. They just wanted everyone who was there that night gone. No job meant no money. And no money meant trouble. Mr. Choi was waiting for her. He leaned against her doorframe, picking his teeth with a dirty toothpick. He was a short, thick man who smelled like stale smoke and cheap cologne. He didn't look like a landlord. He looked like a shark in a tracksuit. Late, he said. He didn't even say hello. Mira clutched her wet bag tighter. Mr. Choi, please. I just need a few more days. I have an interview tomorrow at the restaurant down the street. I will pay you double next week. Choi laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. Next week? You said that last week. My kindness has a limit, Miss Patel. And you have reached it. He stepped aside, and Myra's stomach dropped. The door to her small room was open. Inside, her few belongings, a small suitcase of clothes, a photo of her mother, and a warm blanket, were already packed into 2 garbage bags. You can't do this, Mira whispered, her voice trembling. It's illegal to kick me out without notice. Illegal? Choi stepped closer, invading her personal space. He snatched her purse from her shoulder before she could react. He dug through it with rough hands until he found the small blue booklet. Her passport. No. Mira lunged for it, but he shoved her back easily. She stumbled and fell onto the wet pavement. This is illegal, too. Choi sneered, waving the passport in the air. Living here on an expired work visa? If I call the immigration police, they will put you in a cell before they send you back home. Do you want that? Mira froze. She couldn't go back. Not yet. She had nothing to go back to. Tears hot, with shame pricked her eyes. Please, give it back. It's all I have. Then pay me, Choi said, slipping the passport into his jacket pocket. Until you have my money, this stays with me. Consider it insurance. He kicked the 2 garbage bags toward her. One split open, spilling her clothes into the muddy puddle at her feet. Get out, he spat. If I see you here again, I call the police myself. The door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the narrow alley. The bolt clicked, locking her out of the only safety she had left. Mira sat in the mud, the rain soaking through her thin uniform. She reached out and touched her wet clothes, her shaking hands numb from the cold. She had no job. She had no home. She had no name. She was invisible again. But this time, there was no one to save. The ride to the penthouse was silent. Mira sat in the back of the black sedan, shivering against the soft leather seats. She hugged her arms to her chest, trying not to get mud on the expensive interior. Kongjun drove with one hand on the wheel, his knuckles white. He didn't look at her in the rearview mirror, but she could feel his anger radiating like heat from a furnace. When the car stopped, they were in a private underground garage. Kongjun opened her door and offered his hand. Mira hesitated. Her hand was caked in alley dirt. His was clean and manicured. Come, he said gently. It was the same voice he had used when he was bleeding in the hallway, but stronger now. They took a private elevator that didn't have buttons, just a scanner for his palm. The numbers ticked up, 10, 20, 50. When the doors slid open, Mira gasped. The apartment was like a fortress in the sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the entire glowing city of Seoul below them. The floors were white marble, and the furniture looked like it had never been touched. It was cold, beautiful, and terrifying. Mira stayed near the elevator, dripping rainwater onto the pristine floor. I can't go in there, she whispered. I'll ruin everything. Kongjun turned to her. He didn't look at the floor. He looked at her wet, torn uniform. You can't ruin anything that can be replaced, Mira. He guided her to a massive black sofa. She perched on the edge, ready to bolt. Kongjun disappeared into a side room and returned a moment later with a thick white towel and a first aid kit. He knelt on the floor in front of her. Mira flinched. Sir, you shouldn't. Quiet, he murmured. He draped the towel over her shoulders, then reached for her arm. He wasn't looking at the old scar from the bullet. He was looking at a fresh, angry scrape on her elbow, oozing blood where she had fallen in the mud earlier that day. He opened an alcohol wipe. This will sting. He dabbed the wound with a tenderness that didn't match the violence she knew he was capable of. Mira watched his face. The bruises from his recent battles were fading, but his eyes were sharp. He cleaned the dirt from her skin, his touch steady and warm. For the first time in weeks, Mira felt tears prick her eyes again. Not from fear, but from the shock of being treated like a human being. Kongjun finished cleaning the scrape and placed a bandage over it. He didn't let go of her hand. He stared at the fresh injury, his jaw tightening until a muscle jumped in his cheek. He knew the difference between an accidental fall and a shove. He looked up, locking eyes with her. The warmth in his gaze vanished, replaced by a cold, deadly focus. "This is fresh," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Who did this to you?" Mira swallowed hard, her throat tight. "My landlord, Mr. Choi." Kong Jun stood up slowly. He walked to the window and looked down at the city lights, pulling his phone from his pocket. The protector was gone. The dragon had returned. "Choi," he repeated, testing the name like a piece of bad meat. "Then Mr. Choi has made a very expensive mistake." Mr. Choi's office was not in a skyscraper. It was a cramped, smelly room behind a coin laundry in the worst part of the district. The sign on the door said real estate management, but everyone in the neighborhood knew what really happened inside. At 3 a.m., the rain was still pouring. Two black SUVs rolled silently up to the curb. Kong Jun did not go inside. He sat in the back of the first car, watching a live video feed on a tablet. His head of security, a man named Han, led the team. They didn't knock. They didn't pick the lock. One kick shattered the door frame, and 3 men in dark suits flooded into the room. The office smelled like stale cigarettes and old sweat. Papers were piled everywhere. "Find it," Kong Jun ordered through his microphone. Han moved to a painting of a calming ocean scene on the back wall. It was crooked. He ripped it down, revealing a rusted wall safe. It took him less than 30 seconds to drill the lock. The heavy metal door swung open with a groan. Inside, there was no money. Instead, there were stacks of blue and red booklets. Passports. Dozens of them. Beneath the passports were thick, leather-bound notebooks. "Boss," Han said, his voice tight. "You need to see this." 30 minutes later, Han stood in the penthouse living room. The city lights of Seoul twinkled below them, indifferent to the crimes happening in the dark. On the glass coffee table lay the contents of Choi's safe. Kong Jun picked up the top passport. It belonged to Mira. He flipped it open and saw her photo, younger, smiling, hopeful. A person who didn't know yet how cruel the world could be. He set it down gently and picked up a notebook. It was a ledger. It listed names, dates, and amounts of money that made no sense for rent. "He targets foreigners and the elderly," Han explained, pointing to a column of numbers. "He takes their documents so they can't leave. Then he charges them double for late fees and interest. When they can't pay, he sells their debt." "Sells it to who?" Kong Jun asked, though he already suspected the answer. "The Viper clan," Han said. "He is funneling vulnerable people into their factories and clubs to pay off debts that aren't even real." Mira was next on the list. The air in the room grew heavy. The Viper clan was Kong Jun's rival. They were the ones who had ambushed him in the hotel. Now, they were preying on the woman who had saved his life. Han touched the gun in his shoulder holster. "Do you want us to pay him a visit tonight? We can make him disappear. The river is deep." Kong Jun stared at Myra's passport. He thought about her shivering in the mud, eating trash because this man had stolen her dignity. A bullet to the head was too fast. It was too merciful. He closed the ledger with a snap that sounded like a judge's gavel. "No," Kong Jun said, a cruel smile touching his lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of destruction. "Death is too easy for a man like Choi. We don't just kill him. We ruin him." The grand ballroom of the Seoul Hotel was filled with the smell of expensive perfume and greed. Men in gray suits sipped champagne and laughed. They were there to buy District 4. To them, it wasn't a neighborhood where people lived. It was just lines on a map to be erased and replaced with glass towers. "Lot 49, the auctioneer announced, tapping his microphone. "The Old Market District. Includes 12 residential buildings and commercial zoning. Bidding starts at 10 billion won. A man from a big construction bank raised his paddle. 12 billion. 15, shouted another developer. They were trading Myra's home like it was a playing card. Crash. The double doors at the back of the room flew open. The room went silent. Lee Kong Jun walked in. He didn't wear a tuxedo like the others. He wore his signature dark suit, and he didn't look like he was there to party. He looked like he was there to hunt. Behind him walked Han and 4 other large men. They didn't carry drinks. They carried metal briefcases. "Mr. Lee," the auctioneer squeaked, adjusting his glasses. "This is a private event. You are not on the list." Kong Jun didn't stop walking until he stood right in front of the stage. He looked at the banker who had bid 12 billion. The banker swallowed hard and lowered his paddle. Everyone knew who the Iron Dragon was. Everyone knew that if you crossed him, your buildings tended to catch fire in the middle of the night. I am not here to join the list, Kang Jun said. His voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. I am here to shorten it. He snapped his fingers. Han slammed a heavy briefcase onto the table next to the auctioneer. It popped open. It was full of cash. Stacks and stacks of it. 20 billion won, Kang Jun said. Cash. Right now. The room gasped. That was double what the land was worth. But, sir, the auctioneer stammered. The bank has already. Kang Jun turned to the bank representative. Does the bank want to bid against me? The banker looked at the money. Then he looked at Kang Jun's cold, dead eyes. He looked at the scar on Han's face. He thought about his nice car parked outside and his family at home. No, the banker whispered, dropping his paddle onto the table. The bank withdraws. Kang Jun turned back to the stage. Anyone else? Silence. Not a single hand went up. The power in the room had shifted. It didn't belong to the politicians or the banks anymore. It belonged to the man who wasn't afraid to burn it all down. Going once, the auctioneer said, his voice shaking. Going twice. Bang. The gavel hit the wood. Sold to Mr. Lee. Kang Jun didn't smile. He just buttoned his jacket. He didn't just buy a building. He bought the ground beneath Mr. Choi's feet. And now, the landlord was trespassing on the dragon's territory. The black SUVs roared into the narrow alley, splashing mud onto the cracked sidewalks. This time, they didn't park quietly. They stopped with a screech of tires that made the neighbors peek out from behind their torn curtains. Cameras flashed immediately. Kang Jun had tipped off the press. Reporters stood under umbrellas, their microphones ready. They expected a crime story. They were about to get a justice story. The back door of the lead car opened. Han stepped out, dragging Mr. Choi by the collar of his cheap suit. Choi wasn't smiling today. His face was pale, and he stumbled as Han threw him onto the wet pavement, the exact same spot where Mira had fallen 3 weeks ago. Get up, Kang Jun commanded. He stepped out of the car, looking like a dark prince in the gray slum. He held a metal trash can in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. Mira stepped out behind him. She wore a clean, warm coat now, but she stayed close to Kang Jun's side. The tenants, elderly women, tired fathers, scared children, began to gather. They recognized Choi. They shrank back in fear. Look at him. Kang Jun's voice boomed over the rain. He pointed at the shivering landlord. This man has been selling your debt. He has been stealing your safety. Choi scrambled to his knees. Mr. Lee, please. We can make a deal. I have money. I have more, Kang Jun said coldly. He held up the stack of papers. They were the eviction notices, the debt records, the fake loan agreements. With a flick of a lighter, a small flame danced in the gloom. Kang Jun dropped the burning match onto the papers and tossed them into the metal can. The fire roared up, bright and hot. The tenants gasped. They watched their debts turn to ash. Kang Jun turned to Mira. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy ring of keys. Not just for her apartment, but for the main office. For the whole building. He took your home, Kang Jun said, loud enough for the cameras to hear. So I bought his. He pressed the keys into Mira's hand. Her fingers closed around the cold metal. You don't pay rent anymore, Mira. You own the building. The reporters shouted questions, but Kang Jun ignored them. He turned back to Choi, who was staring at the fire in horror. My things. Choi whimpered. My safe, my clothes. Gone, Kang Jun said. Burned. Or given away. Han stepped forward. He didn't hit Choi. He just pointed to the end of the alley, toward the busy, uncaring street. You have no money, Kang Jun said, his voice devoid of pity. You have no phone. You have no coat. And you have no friends in this city anymore. Han shoved Choi hard. The landlord stumbled, slipping in the mud, splashing dirty water onto his face. He looked up, waiting for a car to come pick him up, for someone to help him. But no one moved. The tenants just watched. Walk, Kang Jun ordered. Mr. Choi, the man who had terrorized the block for 10 years, scrambled to his feet and ran. He ran into the cold rain with nothing but the clothes on his back, disappearing into a city that didn't care if he lived or died. Just like he had told Mira to do. Mr. Choi ran until his lungs burned. He didn't go to a hotel or a friend's house. He went to the old shipyard at the edge of the city, where the shadows were long and deep. He scrambled over a rusted fence and fell onto the wet concrete, gasping for air. "Boss!" he screamed into the dark. "Help me." He took it all. He burned the papers. A single floodlight clicked on with a loud buzz. It was blindingly bright. Standing in the center of the beam was a man wearing a long white coat that somehow stayed spotless in the grime of the shipyard. He wore a silver mask that covered the lower half of his face. This was the Viper, the man who really owned the slums. Mr. Choi was just a puppet. "You are loud, Choi," the Viper said. His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "And you are wet." Choi crawled forward, shaking from cold and fear. "Mr. Lee, the dragon, he went crazy. He spent 20 billion won just to buy one block. He gave the keys to a maid. A stupid maid." The Viper tilted his head. "A maid?" "Yes, the one I evicted. He acted like she was a queen. He ruined me for her." The Viper didn't look angry. He looked interested. He stepped closer, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. "Lee Kong-jun is a cold man. He does not spend billions on charity. He does not burn down his enemies for a stranger." The Viper pulled a silver pistol from his coat. It was long and sleek. "He cares about her," the Viper whispered, a cruel smile hidden behind his mask. "That is his mistake. And you are just a mistake." "No, wait. I can fix." "Fut." The silenced gunshot was barely a whisper. Mr. Choi fell backward into the puddles, his eyes staring up at the rain, seeing nothing. He was gone before he hit the ground. The Viper stepped over the body without looking down. He pulled out a phone. "Change of plans," he said into the device. "The dragon has exposed his heart. Cut it out." Underscore. High above the city, the penthouse was quiet. The fire in the fireplace crackled softly. Mira stood by the massive window, looking out at the glittering lights of Seoul. She felt safe for the first time in her life. The nightmare of the alley felt like a bad dream. "You should eat," Kong-jun said, walking up behind her. He held a plate of warm food. He looked different without his suit jacket, less like a boss, more like a man. "I can't believe it's over," Mira said softly. "I own the building. No one can kick me out." "No one," Kong-jun promised. He stood close to her, his reflection next to hers in the dark glass. "You are safe here, Mira." Mira smiled. She turned to look at him, to thank him properly. But then she saw it. A tiny red light appeared on the glass. It moved fast, like a furious red insect. It slid over the reflection of the city, over the reflection of Kong-jun's shoulder, and stopped right over Myra's heart. Kong-jun saw it too. His eyes went wide with horror. He didn't speak. He didn't breathe. He just moved. "Down!" he roared, lunging toward her. The window exploded inward. Glass rained down on them like jagged hail. Kong-jun didn't hesitate. He tackled Mira, covering her body with his own as they slammed onto the marble floor. A second later, bullets chewed up the expensive white sofa where she had been sitting. "Stay down," Kong-jun roared. 3 men in black tactical gear swung through the broken window on ropes. They hit the floor rolling, weapons raised. Kong-jun scrambled to his feet. He was bleeding from the glass cuts, and his face was already bruised from the fight with the landlord's men earlier, but he moved like a tiger. He grabbed the first assassin's gun barrel and twisted it. There was a sickening crack, and the man screamed. Kong-jun silenced him with a brutal elbow to the jaw, but there were too many of them. The second assassin kicked Kong-jun hard in the ribs. Kong-jun groaned, stumbling back against the wall. He was hurt. He was tired. For the first time, he looked human, not invincible. The assassin raised his pistol, aiming right at Kong-jun's chest. Mira was crouching behind an overturned armchair. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw the gun. She saw Kong-jun's pained grimace. She knew he couldn't move fast enough. "Hide," a voice in her head whispered. "Stay invisible." But she looked at the man who had burned down a city block for her. She looked at the blood on his shirt. He hadn't hidden when she was in trouble. Mira stood up. On the table beside her was a heavy blue vase. It was worth more than she used to make in a year. She grabbed it with both hands. "Hey," she screamed. The assassin flinched. He turned his head toward the shout, distracted for just a heartbeat. Mira threw the vase with all her strength. It smashed into the assassin's shoulder, shattering into 1,000 pieces. He stumbled, his shot going wide and hitting the ceiling. That 1 second was all Kang Jun needed. He launched himself off the wall. He tackled the distracted gunman, driving him to the floor. There was a struggle, a sharp cry, and then silence. Kang Jun stood up slowly, breathing hard. The third assassin lay unconscious near the window. The penthouse was destroyed. The beautiful furniture was full of holes. The floor was covered in glass and water from the rain blowing in. The wind howled through the broken wall, freezing the room. Kang Jun wiped blood from his lip. He looked at the shattered vase, then at Mira. She was shaking, her hands still raised in the air, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't run away. She hadn't hidden. He walked over to her, stepping over the debris. He didn't look at the ruin of his home. He only looked at her. "You missed," he said, his voice rough but gentle. Mira stared at her trembling hands. "I broke your vase." "You saved my life," Kang Jun corrected. He reached out and carefully lowered her hands. Again, the danger was over for now, but as the cold wind swirled around them, they both knew the war had just begun. The glass was swept away. The blood was scrubbed from the marble, but the silence in the penthouse had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with a new understanding. Kang Jun stood by the boarded-up window, watching the city repair itself. His arm was in a sling, and the bruises on his face had turned a dark purple. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He had spent his whole life building walls to keep people out. He thought safety meant being alone. He looked across the room. Mira was sitting at the dining table, reading a thick stack of papers. She wasn't wearing her maid uniform. She wasn't wearing the oversized coat he had given her in the rain. She was wearing a navy blue suit. It was tailored to fit her perfectly, sharp and professional. "You look different," Kang Jun said. Mira looked up. She didn't flinch. She didn't look down at the floor like she used to. "I feel different." Kang Jun walked over and placed a final document on the table. It was a deed. But it wasn't just for the apartment building. It was for a company. "I have dissolved the shell corporations," he said, his voice steady. "The money I used to buy the district, it is now the capital for a new foundation. The Dragon Housing Initiative." Myra's eyes widened as she read the paper. "Kang Jun, this says I'm the CEO. I know how to break things, Mira," he said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "I know how to fight. I know how to scare people like Mr. Choi. But I don't know how to build a community. I don't know what families need to feel safe." He leaned forward. "You do. You know every crack in the sidewalk. You know every leaky roof. You know the names of the children who play in the alleys." "I was just a maid," Mira whispered. "You were never just anything," Kang Jun corrected her. "You saved my life when I was nothing but a bleeding man in a hallway. You fought for me when armed men broke into my home. You are not a victim, Mira. You are a survivor. And survivors should lead." Mira touched the pen. Her hand didn't shake. She thought about the cold rain, the hunger, the fear. Then she thought about the families who now had warm homes because of this man. She picked up the pen and signed her name. Mira Patel, CEO. They walked out onto the balcony together. The wind was cold, but neither of them shivered. The city lights glittered below them, a million tiny stars in a sea of darkness. "They will still come for us," Mira said, looking out at the horizon. "The Viper isn't done. Let them come," Kang Jun said. He didn't stand in front of her to protect her this time. He stood beside her. He looked at the woman who had once eaten from the trash to survive. Now, she owned the skyline. "We have a city to fix," he said. Mira smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "Then we better get to work, partner."